Hi, my name is Denise Galarza Sepulveda. I am the director of the Center for Engaged Academic Learning, and I'm also a member of the LSNA Campus Climate Committee. And we're here today to talk about inclusive teaching with a group of faculty. If you could all go around and introduce yourselves, give your department and maybe your teaching background.
My name is Saras Soderstrom. I'm joint in Organizational Studies and Program in the Environment, and I do a variety of teaching, almost all including groups, but some that are very focused project-based courses and others that are larger scale, lower level lectures, most of them at the intersection of organizations and environmental and social issues.
Great, thanks. And how many years have you been teaching?
I have been on faculty for 4 years now.
Great, thank you.
My name is Robin Queen. I'm in the linguistics department, and I also have appointments in the English department, the German department, and the Honors College. I've been teaching at the University of Michigan since 1999 and teach a range of courses from large lecture courses to small seminar courses, and generally teach on topics related to language and its social manifestations in social contexts.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Theresa Satterfield. I'm in Romance Languages and Literatures. I'm also affiliated with the Center for Human Growth and Development and Complex Systems. I've been here at the university since 1997. I can't believe that. And my courses also run the range, as Sarah and Robin's. I teach small courses that have to do with linguistics and linguistics related to the Romance languages. I also teach lectures and seminars and some graduate workshops. I also have a project that is near and dear to me, In Nuestra Lengua, which means in our language, which is a literacy and culture program for heritage language elementary school students here in southeastern Michigan.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Baran. I'm currently the interim director of the Lloyd Hall Scholars Program. My home department is the Sweetland Center for Writing, and I also teach courses in the English department. I've taught here since 2000. I tend to teach small classes, writing classes, all different kinds of writing, everything from business writing to fiction to essay writing. Currently, as the interim director of the Lloyd Hall Scholars Program, piloting 2 new projects through our unit. One is a community-based learning course, who our art director will be teaching. Another one is a writing course that we're trying to get approved for the race and ethnicity requirement for next winter.
Great. Thank you. So I wanted to start off with a very broad question about what inclusive teaching means for you, and you can define it in your own way. If you can share your thoughts about that.
I'll begin.
Yeah, please.
So I have to say, when I frame this word inclusivity as a linguist, I always start from this base of empathy. For me, empathy is kind of like the foundation of respect and inclusivity. And for me, from there, I talk about having students experience success in my classroom. And that can mean lots of different things, of course, but a lot of times it means that they feel comfortable in discussions and participating, being engaged, and also just being encouraged to think about things in a different way and to find a new perspective. And sometimes it means discovering their biases and learning to respect others and, of course, to respect me as a professor.
Does that resonate with others?
I think so. I mean, I think especially the issue of empathy is really central to. I mean, I will be honest and say I don't usually think of my teaching in terms of specifically this kind of. I am going to take an inclusive teaching approach. I sort of think of it more as teaching and showing students that I have as much respect for them as I want them to have for me and for what we're doing together, and that is really all sort of. Grows from a position of empathy for one another, and to be thinking very carefully about how easy it is to assume that our own position is the obvious position that everyone will have, and to recognize when that isn't the case, and to think about what it means when there are situations where there isn't going to be a right answer, there isn't going to be a single opinion, that people will actually disagree, and that part of living in an inclusive world is learning to live with that fact and figure out how you work with that fact rather than trying to get everyone to have the same opinion. And for me, that's really, I think, at the crux. So I try really hard to talk to students about, people will legitimately disagree on this particular matter, and part of what we have to do as citizens in the world together is figure out what's the process we need to work through this particular disagreement.
I think the other piece that I continuously think about and struggle with within the classroom is how to help build not just the respect, the openness, the dialogue between me and students, but amongst students themselves, and especially in thinking about student teams. And so I found part of the reason that I started really being more explicit about thinking about what might be inclusive teaching versus strong pedagogy in potentially other ways were feeling like I heard too many students saying that they weren't comfortable disagreeing in their group, seeing that students who were ranked lower in participation tended to be underrepresented minorities in some dimension or another, that students were attributing a lack of interest to others when it was really communication and respect and engagement. And I felt like I owed them really thinking about how can I structure the classroom to try to mitigate some of this, and how can I work with them as teams and structure team processes so that they have the skills not only in this classroom but longer term to think about how do we work with others, how do we disagree with each other, how do we engage when it's not necessarily clear that we're all, in many places not coming from the same place. And so I think that for me is what made it really, again, this transition to saying I'm committed to really thinking about inclusive teaching and how to bring that into the classroom.
I'll just add a couple other pieces. I would agree with a lot of what's been said. And I guess I'm thinking, this just occurred to me to think of it this way as inclusive learning as well. One, to expect everyone in the class to be able to do well. So to communicate that to the whole class and for students, for each other, a little bit like what as Sarah is saying. And the other thing that I've learned is that I really don't know who is in the room unless they tell me. Like, I have no idea what people's identities are, what baggage they're bringing to the classroom. I have no idea what they're learning unless they tell me. Mm-hmm. So I structure a lot of things, well, not a lot of different things, but one thing I do regularly, but it's constant feedback, almost class period by class period, to figure out what students are taking away from every class. Because as much as I think, like, oh, that was a great class, that went well, it's they tell me what they're picking up, and sometimes it's kind of like, wow, I can't believe I said that 4 times, but no. And so then I know I need to kind of structure something differently. I know that student might need an individual attention, that office hours or something. So being inclusive by thinking of inclusivity not just around the ways we might normally think it, but just diverse learners as well as anything else.
So you each mentioned how you approach the classroom. You talked about empathy, respect, the complexity that comes with helping students learn that they can disagree with each other. If you could talk about how, at the start of the semester, do you set up a context for them to be able to learn these things?
Honestly, I think the most important thing that I do is from the very beginning use their names. It doesn't matter the size of their class. I learn as many of their names as I can even before the class starts, and I use their names right away. And I think that, it sounds ridiculous in some sense because it's the easiest thing in the world to just learn someone's name, but I think it has made a huge difference in how they respond to me and how they respond to one another. You can't use their name right off the bat because they'll think you're stalking. You've stalked them. So like, how do you know my name?
That's creepy.
But yeah, it seems creepy. But if you've sort of studied the roster a little bit and then ask them their name when they speak for the first time, and then you learn it and use it, I think that is an invaluable tool, and it's an easy tool to use.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think, I always ask the students what's their preference in terms of their name, and make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, and get to know the students individually, right? I think that goes a long way for me, because I think once I know them and I can make the course materials even more relevant, right, to their needs and their concerns, then I've already helped them to have this successful experience. And for me, I think from day one, the syllabus even has to show this inclusivity, right? So I try to make sure in terms of the syllabus that I'm not being gender specific where I don't need to be, right? And that I'm including all perspectives and multiple voices in the materials that we're going to use, and making sure that I even state things about if you're a student with disabilities, the resources, and making sure this is something that I was kind of shocked, but I've been doing for a while now, that making sure that all the course materials that I've listed are actually accessible to all of the students. Right. I was surprised how many of my students really don't have laptops, that they use the resource centers on campus or the computing centers, and that's their main computer, right? Mm-hmm. And so to assign different kinds of activities where they have to have access, and maybe for them late at night, to a computer wasn't being fair. So just making sure that all of the required materials can be accessed, and that all students feel that they're getting the resources they need.
It's a tension, I think, sometimes with what you hear about neat things to do with technology in the classroom. And I mean, I'd love to use some of these online tools for sure, but if you know that a significant chunk of your students can't access that in class, it's like, okay, I fundamentally feel like even though I love so much of what this brings pedagogically, I can't use this tool in the classroom because not everybody can have it. And so really trying to think about, I do some online collection of information. It's like, you can work in groups, right? So submit it as a team, just write your names on it. It doesn't matter who does it. And then no one knows who does or doesn't have it because everyone's working in groups of 3s and 4s. And it's just the way the class works. But I struggle with that tension often of how to think about integrating technology in the classroom when laptops aren't required for U of M students yet. It's not a given that people have that access, and what does that mean for what you do?
And that was my bias, kind of. I was thinking, everyone has a laptop. We can bring our laptops to class and work, on bringing up data or something, and that would be a great. And so now I do make sure that we, as a class, go and use resources, for example, use computing resources, things like that, so that everyone is using the exact same computer, and so we don't have these kind of disparities. But it's very much a tension.
And also, in a sense, taking the technology out of the classroom. So for the first time, I was really against doing this, but I decided to try it. I had a no technology classroom in my large lecture class, no laptops, nothing. And it was great. I loved it. I'll do it from now on. And I was a real skeptic.
That's really interesting.
But it was, it really actually worked really well.
So people are writing their notes on paper?
Writing their notes on paper, and then I have an assignment where they can get credit for curating those notes and uploading them for their classmates. So they get some credit for that. So that way there's also a repository of their notes, but that they took them first by hand.
Oh, that's really cool.
So you've referenced different aspects of the teaching, so team learning, right, and group learning, and also establishing norms in which it is understood that there are going to be disagreements, that you are going to be thinking about your own assumptions, that it is part of the course goal to grapple with complexity and to be all right with it, disagreeing with each other. If you could talk about how do you establish those norms? What's the protocol? How do you let students know that in this classroom it's going to be in this way? We're going to approach it in this way because the goal is for us to move past that discomfort to really get some deeper learning.
I mean, I have it in the syllabus. Say flat out, we all come to this with different experiences, and those are going to come burbling up as we have conversations, and then make that active on the first day. So, presenting them with something that I know they will disagree on, and showing them that that's okay, and asking for disagreement about things, asking them to disagree with me on the first day of class. And, I think that's, shows them that it's okay and nothing's bad going to happen, and I'm not mad, and, it's fine for them. They should disagree with me. Well, so.
My identity is very much, explicit. And so those kind of conversations can be even more difficult. And I've talked to Rob about this, about me. I'm the trigger, I call myself, right? Because in some senses, I can shut down a discussion on inequality or racism or any other kind of controversial topic just by walking in the room, and students fearing for their grade or fearing that they might, cause some problem in terms of the person who's in authority, don't want to talk. And so we also, on the first day, we established these are the norms, these are the kinds of behaviors that we will be expecting, will be welcomed, and how to have a productive conversation that might be leading to disagreements, and how the idea is that you can disagree and contribute to the argument, but not put the focus on the person, and we talk about those kind of things. And I agree. I think you have to establish that from day one. You have to model it yourself, to model what it is to be actively listening and be engaged in a discussion, even though you might not agree with all of the points. I think that's important that we do.
I think one of the other things I do early is try to disconnect what is the grade versus what is the learning process. And so, engage in the fact that in the courses that I teach, there's very rarely a right answer. We often don't know what's happening. And so there's a need for this type of debate, and that you can get an A with a totally different answer from someone else who gets an A. And so when we post some of the early assignments and the kind of exemplars, we post from two different opinions so that they can see here are exemplars that are being shared as good work, and they have totally different actual responses about what a company should do in a situation, for example, or how to work with that. And so I think that helps the students recognize early that the goal isn't to find a right answer and all come to agreement. The goal is to really critically think and consider what types of information inform that, and that might lead you in very different directions than others in the class. And so thinking about that kind of individually. And then I've also started doing a lot more with the teams themselves as well. So in most of my classes, teams are formed. If it's a class where I know it's a core requirement, I form like the second week. Otherwise, it's the day after the drop add date. Teams are formed, right? So regardless of that structure is how we put that together. But I have varying levels of activities for them to do as teams. In one class that's a semester-long project, more intense working together than many of them have had for a longer period of time. I've actually adapted one of the social identity exercises for them to use that as a way of starting to share and learning about each other, and using that to inform a team contract, which I have done in every single class that uses a team. And one huge component of that needs to be how they're going to deal with conflict. But I used to learn at the end of the semester that this team fell apart because this person worked all week and these two were on a sports team and traveled all weekend and they could never get together. Well, they all wanted to work together, right? But they all assumed that no one else cared and it fell apart. Right? But if those are things, one, that I can include into team formation, but two, that they talk about early and how they're going to function as a team, what they're going to work on, how they're going to talk about conflict, then that hopefully starts off on a right path to avoid some of that. And then I've also started doing evals multiple times over the course of the semester so that I can see if there are teams that might be having challenges. And 9 times out of 10, it's communication, misunderstanding, sometimes different priorities, but often everyone with the best of intentions, and they just need a little facilitation from myself or the GSIs or someone to get them back on track. And I very rarely have had as many problem teams at the end of the semester as you had without some of those structural things. And I think that helps a lot with them getting past the idea that if we're a good team, it means we all like each other and we all agree and everything's happy-go-lucky, into a stage of thinking we can be a good team and disagree and push each other and argue back and forth on what fundamentally is going on and what we should do about it, but in a way that is respectful and with empathy and engagement. And I've found that those are helpful. They clearly don't solve everything, but they help.
Something that I do at the beginning, it's on the syllabus too, is set ground rules for discussion to kind of help to foster those kind of productive disagreements. Simple, obvious stuff like focusing on the idea rather than the person, this kind of stuff, sharing airtime, this kind of thing. And I've found it useful to be able to return back to those as the semester goes on. If I catch myself flagging and that some people are dominating the conversation, I can just kind of say, remember we decided, we agreed. Another thing I think is valuable is to lower the I don't know if it's lowering the stakes, but acknowledge that some of the things we say in a classroom we might intend to say, and some of it we might be reproducing things that are in public discourse. So we might be reproducing a stereotype or something and something I think sometimes students might need a moment to be sort of checked in with to see if they intended to say that thing. Did you know what I hear? So using kind of active listening as a facilitator to say, what I hear you saying is, and then when they hear back what they've said, they can kind of either affirm or correct or this kind of thing to try to be as faithful as possible, and making sure the student is represented, especially if it's kind of a sensitive subject. And then if a stereotype is being, used, then to use that as a place to start sort of interrogating that, and what do you mean by that, or do other people, what are other people hearing here? So ways to kind of have students be free to speak, but to hold them accountable for things that you don't want to be perpetuated in the classroom. And I do think that's I think it's easy for us to sit here and talk, and I don't want to pretend like I have that down in any kind of a way. But I think breaking it apart a little bit to say, you do intend to, I say, that's a stereotype that a lot of people hold. So to take it off that student, for example, that's a stereotype that a lot of people hold. What do you think people get out of perpetuating that stereotype? What do you think people get out of believing that? Or who might that hurt? This kind of thing. I'm not saying that those are the exact questions I would use, but a way to kind of breathe some air into that discussion so we can actually talk about it, not to shut the conversation down.
Yeah, that points to the kind of, and that is also mentioned, the idea of being a trigger, right, and having students with different identities in the room, the difficulty of having team dynamics kind of flare up. If you could talk about a difficult moment that you had in a classroom that was instructive for your own teaching, it could be around dynamics of identity. It could be that your own realization that, I approach this in this way, or if you would be brave enough to share a difficult moment, that would be wonderful. I think that we would get a lot out of it.
There's so many opportunities.
Count the ways.
That's right.
I had a student once who took a very strong position that it wasn't their responsibility to explain to their classmates why their classmates were being prejudiced or being bigoted or whatever. And that was it was an interesting thing to me to really talk with the students, and also to think about it myself, of sort of, absolutely, that's absolutely right. It's no one's responsibility to point someone else's bigotry out to them. On the other hand, if you want it pointed out, who's the right person to do it? Who do you want to represent the position that you yourself hold, right? And that I don't know that I can't say, and I cracked it this way, because I remain a little bit vexed about how you kind of navigate that position where some student will say something perpetuating some sort of stereotype, and another student, someone else will step in, and then when they don't are upset, but also don't want to take don't see it as their responsibility, and totally fair enough. And that's, for me, is I think that's a tricky balance to find, and especially not always wanting to be the one to step in on this, sort of wanting to be careful not to be always jumping in to make sure everyone is in is playing nice, in a sense. I mean, I find that I still find that very difficult. The particular experience was a student very vocally saying, "It is not my responsibility to point my classmates' racism out to them." And sort of thinking about, well, you're right, it's not your responsibility. But do you want people who hold different identity positions representing your position? I mean, I think those are hard. I don't know. Maybe you guys have a good way of managing that, but I think that's a hard one.
It's hard. It's really hard. I was thinking along the same lines, and just coming back to my experiences in the classroom of walking in and having this experience that social psychologists have called the stereotype threat, right? Where people see, especially an underrepresented minority, and they link their identity to some negative or some inability, some defect, right? And so for me personally, being the instructor and feeling kind of that attitude toward me of, well, African Americans or Latinos aren't scholars, they're not intellectual, and so who are you to be the knowledge bringer or the person, right, who's facilitating knowledge in this classroom, and just kind of a lack of respect that could come with that sometimes trickles to other underrepresented students or people in the classroom. And I have to say, it's kind of ongoing for me, that I feel that it's something that I constantly have to prove and to kind of guard against, and also not to assume that it's going to happen. So not to let my bias from my experiences always lead me to think, oh, that white male student who refuses to be a part of the conversation is kind of practicing, this kind of stereotype threat. And I find that, again, the more open I am in sharing these experiences and talking to my students about them, the more open they can be too, and realize that, right, it's okay to have a conversation about illegal immigration with the Latina professor and not feel that we have to agree with her, right? And I think, again, these are all very tricky and slippery points, and in any given semester, it depends on the dynamics of the other people in the class, right? It depends on so many factors that my game plan of how I try to resolve it changes. But I do know, again, going back to empathy, that when we take a minute and we step back and we do exercises like, okay, take the position that you're least comfortable with and prepare some kind of presentation on that, right? Or step back and let's see, what is the main idea that we're all talking around or trying to think about, that it kind of can bring us into a productive space. Yeah.
That's great. So each of you are working on really fascinating projects within your own classrooms. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about what your project is specifically, and if you could share how you came to that moment where you thought, okay, well, I need to approach this in a different way. Sarah, you alluded a little bit to that adjustment that you made in your teaching. But if it would be great for us to hear about your specific projects.
I mean, the interesting thing is I came in first year faculty, and it's like, here in the fall, you're teaching our core senior capstone course, basically, right? The students have to do this huge, intense project at the same time that they're interviewing for jobs or applying to grad schools for most of them. And my whole focus was, how do I give them some sort of ownership on this, and a very tactical lens on, like, what are the research methods? How do you reach out to an organization to try to let them study you for the project, which was basically the goal of the semester, right? Find an organization, develop a research question, use surveys, interviews, and observations to address your research question, communicate it effectively at the end, right? And so I thought, okay, here's this, like, they call it a methods class. Like, all I need to do is get them to work together. And at the end of the year, I felt like, okay, I had success in that there were 10 amazing projects that were done. In general, the team seemed to do high quality work and worked well, but there was this nagging element of feeling like I hadn't pushed them enough to engage, right? It wasn't a class that said it was race and ethnicity. It wasn't a class that had anything in its writing to do with what I think many students think of when they think inclusive class, right? It wasn't, it wasn't about climate change. Like, when I do that in my environment course, like, I know that's a heated topic and we have to think through all of these issues. And so while I was noodling on that, at the same time, we had students in our department who were struggling with the fact that they felt our program wasn't engaging enough with issues of inclusivity and making the program supportive for all of the students who were in it, and that instead we had kind of a one dominant voice that tended to be white, high socioeconomic status. And so they were working and started coming to faculty and kind of saying, hey, we're feeling this. How might we think about what can happen? And so in parallel with other things going on in the department, we were contemplating, here's the fact, I have all of the seniors in one class captured for 15 weeks and they have to take it, right? Like, so let's push me to think about how I can engage in all of these topics that are so important to me, but that I had seen as disconnected from the class. And that was where it was really great to work with the students, because half of them had experienced it the previous semester, half of them were going to be in it the next year. And we brainstormed, okay, where are ways that we might be able to think about this, right? Someone had done a lot of dialogue groups with intergroup relations, and they said, oh, well, here's the social identity exercise. Maybe we can do that as a class. I was like, well, actually, I don't know that it would work as a class, but let's think about how we do this in the teams. Maybe we can think about this as a team building early, right? And so the first year that I did anything, all I did was this team building exercise early with a bit of a conversation about how social identity influences organizations, and then I asked them to reflect on it at the end of the semester. And so in a lot of ways, that was great, and it was helpful, and you hear feedback from teams of like, oh, I've been with this person for 3 different semester projects, and I never knew this about her, right? So it pushed a deeper learning and understanding. But it felt a bit disconnected, right? So then the next year, it was, how do we think about bringing this in at various places? Well, where might bias show up a lot in research, right? So let's think about surveys. Like, those are a landmine of issues around bias. So let's think about how to make that part of the exercise and reflect back on what we did that second day of class. I brought in more clips that were engaging in issues of privilege and status and access that we talked about from the perspective of either how do you recognize that in yourself when you're asking to do this work at different organizations? How do you recognize this in other people's work when you're supposed to be the consumer of research and using that to make organizational decisions for those of you who are going to be consultants from a business case perspective, but for the many of you who are going into education or public health or this plethora of other areas, why do you need to know about this so that you can be a good leader, analyst, decision maker going forward? And so it's been this continued process of thinking about recognizing myself how what I had initially seen as disconnected is really fundamentally integrated, and being pushed by students and then working with students to recognize where there might be places to more explicitly integrate that into the class, and recognize that it's a ongoing process. So some things will get done one year and some things you'll improve on the next year and some things I won't do again, right? And thinking through those. But it's gone from the end of year reflections being a handful of students being like, I don't even know why I have to reflect on this, to having many more students, I think, being able to engage in what seems like a more authentic way and how various issues around inclusivity influence their team, their project, the organization they were studying, or our program kind of as a whole. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what the next couple years bring as we keep pushing that.
That's great. And that integration and why does it matter? I think ultimately students are thirsty for the answer to that question, right? Why does it matter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can I ask really quickly, how do you form the teams? Are they...
So the way that the
Self-selected
class
or
is structured, I have in a bunch of different classes, different ways. This class, because of the fact that they're working together all semester, and I force them to find the organization that they're going to study, I do form the teams to some extent based on their interests. So I do information gathering the first day where I'm asking them about what is their major and minor. Of course, they're all the same major, but a plethora of minors. What are their long-term interests? Where do they think they might be in a year and 5 years? What is their experience with research? And then what is their availability? And so I divide based on those. So for example, someone who wants to work in nonprofits, I won't put with people who want to be consultants because there's a conflict right off the bat about who they want to study with what type of research question. And so far I've been able to get a pretty good, there's almost always an environment group and there's almost always an education and a public health. And then I've got a bunch of people who want to be analysts, right? So far it's been lucky. The class is about 50, so I do about 10 teams of 4 to 5. I found that 6 is too many and 3 is too few.
Right.
So,
I found the same in
yeah.
the group.
For my larger class, so I do similar teams for a semester-long project, just not nearly as intensive for I do a 200-level business in the environment course, and that's 150-ish people. For them, I prioritize first, when can you meet, so that I'm not instilling a conflict right off the bat based on timing. And then I ask a few questions about what they're interested in that are pretty targeted on the project. So that project is more close-ended, so I can get a sense around what geographies are you interested in, what industries are you interested in, and do the matching based on that. So I do try to have some shared interest overlap initially for the groups, and then let them be more kind of evolving as they go.
One of the team-based things that I have found is very useful is actually giving them time in class, lots of time in class to meet as a group, and not assume that they'll meet outside. Like give them essentially enough class time to do the work they need to do as a group.
Yep, and walking around.
Yeah.
Getting them back onto some of those directions.
Because I think that's what students find, in my experience, so anxiety-provoking is this idea that they have to find some time outside of class to meet with 4 other people. And fair enough, I would find that
their schedules are crazy, so it's
complex.
Not a minuscule challenge.
Exactly.
That's the other thing that has increased year on year is how much time they have in class, but also how targeted it is. So it's become smaller but more frequent blocks.
Right.
That's great. Teresa, if you could talk about your project.
Okay, well, I have several, always juggling a lot. So what's near and dear to me, my passion is the community-based literacy program that we do called In Nuestra Lengua, where I recruit students who take linguistics classes in Romance languages, and there's a series of courses that I teach. One is bilingualism in the Spanish-speaking world, and I teach a class on Spanish in the U.S. And so students who are interested in working in this community program, which is a Saturday school for elementary kids who use Spanish in their homes. And so our mission is to help them to become fully literate in Spanish. And so that will give them, as we know, kind of a boost in terms of learning English as well and stabilizing their bilingualism. And so we use lots of students who are interested in having this authentic experience in the community to help the Latino community. And so one of the things is when they first come to visit the Saturday program, which is a Spanish-only zone. No one uses any English. They just turn gray with shock because a lot of them, even if they've studied abroad, they were not expecting to come into Ann Arbor, Old West Side, into a place where every Spanish-speaking country is represented and no one is speaking English. And it's a culture shock within their own country, within their own environment. And so for them, many of students say to me, I was the only one. And I was like, welcome to our world. This is what it's like, right? This is what it means, right? To find this place where you're the only person like you and you have to get along and adjust and modify. But it's very gratifying. All the students who do service in the project tell me that they've become connected with the kids, with the families, and they learn so much about what it means to be Latino, what it means to be Spanish speaking, and why it's important to maintain these heritage languages, right, in the U.S. And for me, that program is kind of self-selecting. The students come, they take the classes, they want to be in that Saturday morning project. Even during football season, they want to be on Saturday mornings and in the Spanish school. The other project I really wanted to quickly maybe get some feedback from everyone here is a class that I've just started teaching. And I have to say, in Romance languages, I'm one of the few people of color, and I kind of feel duty-bound, even though I am a formal linguist and I teach formal classes on syntax and those things in linguistics, but I feel duty-bound sometimes a lot, every semester, to teach a course on Afro-Latinos or mock Spanish, and I don't know. So I'm really taking these days with mock Spanish, which is the use of Spanish by non-Spanish speakers. And so when it's kind of, I don't know, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous in our culture, where you hear people saying things like the big enchilada, or, right, all of these slogans that people say who don't really speak Spanish. So this is a seminar I've been offering, and the students are fascinated. And when we bring up this idea of, well, who uses this kind of Spanish? Are these people racist? Why are they, because it's kind of always done in a kind of joking, sometimes can be kind of negative framework. And so this class has just kind of taken off, and students are really interested in finding out if they're using mock Spanish and how can they kind of help the world, right? How can they stop it? How can they kind of promote this message of not using mock Spanish among their friends? And I'm just amazed at the level of engagement of students who a lot of times are Spanish majors, but they don't necessarily respect Spanish, or it's not a part of the culture in the same way. And so when they're kind of confronted with using this kind of mock variety of Spanish, how they begin to grow and kind of their eyes are opened up why they shouldn't use this kind of language, and why it maybe isn't a good reflection on them when they also know a different register of Spanish, right? When they can actually, they're studying Spanish formally. And I often in this class come up against this wall of students saying, so am I racist if I talk this way? And to me, this is like one of the this is the wall for me. It seems like that word racist for a certain group of students, right, is like anathema. I mean, once you're talking about racism, and for me as a person, it's just like, no one can say it.
This is just probably mostly an aside, but I'm reading this book right now by Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who's a duke called Racism Without Racists.
Oh, no, I've read another book by him, but not that
yeah.
one.
So I mean, he gets at the idea of color blindness as kind of racism as a different form. But I'm really valuing. I've heard somebody else, and I can't remember who said it in some materials I'm looking at right now. But really valuing this idea that separating the idea or the phenomenon out from the person just for a moment. That this mock Spanish is a part of our culture. Let's look at it like before we start calling ourselves racist. Before you start calling yourself a racist, what is this thing? You know what I mean? I mean, just to create a little bit of separation.
Right, and it's so fascinating because some of the titles that we read on mock Spanish, right, to put it into an academic context, in the titles it says mock Spanish, a form of racist discourse. I mean, so it's like it's already there.
Right.
There's no hiding.
Yeah. And so it's so interesting to see students' faces and their fear that, they're going to be outed somehow as a racist. And students will say, there aren't even any Spanish speakers in my town of Harmony, Michigan, right? I don't know any. How can I be right? They're already making these, coming to my office hours in a confessional kind of way so that I don't see them as, right? Yeah. It's very interesting. Can
I ask you real quick, do you know this instructor at Ball State University who's writing? I was teaching this class on mock Spanish.
No.
We came across his materials in our working group, and I can't remember exactly how you spell his name, so I don't want to kind of mispronounce it. But he's doing he's got students doing kind of on the street interviews and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what we do as well. And we go into restaurants and see their mock Spanish on their menus and talk to the people in the kitchen who are invariably Latino Spanish speakers. And we do all those kind of things as well. And it's, I think for many students, it's a revelation. It's something that it helps them grow. They never thought of themselves in this way, and it's painful, but then they realize they can grow from it and move on and stop the behavior if it's right.
Or sometimes what I also tell them is don't stop the behavior,
but
just be aware of the range of ways in which that can be interpreted and be clear for yourself.
Exactly.
And I think it is a really interesting question, especially for majority students, to have to think about, is this behavior I'm engaging in racist? Right? Exactly. And get them to sort of, okay, well, how would you know if it is or isn't? Does everyone agree on what is and isn't racism?
Precisely. Clearly, and I think, that's what, so if they want to stop the behavior, if they feel, that that's something that is necessary for them or would make them, grow even further. But I think that that is, for me, the whole essence, again, of this mission of inclusivity, right? Is, are we going to grow? Are we going to change behaviors or make a more awareness where there wasn't that aspect before? Right?
But I think a couple of themes that I struggle with is a lens that change is hard, and that you have to be kind of vulnerable and accepting of your own failures in engaging in it, and recognizing that it's not like all of a sudden tomorrow I'm going to wake up changed, right? And I mean, in the courses I teach, it's often around what is being an environmentalist, right? And you're teaching a 9 a.m. class. I have a young kid, and I was there with my throwaway coffee mug, and I know it's bad, right? And I'm standing in front of 150 students with my non-renewable coffee mug. And it was okay, guys, see, I'm exhausted. I'm not functional. I needed the caffeine, and this is the way it was going to happen today. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm totally corrupt polluter, whatever. But it's difficult. We all make mistakes, but it's engaging in that and the process. And when so many kids, I think, have grown up in spaces that are often homogenous, and so you don't have to think about the vulnerability or the challenges of even having a conversation with someone from a different background than you, yet you hear all of the time that racism is bad and this is wrong, that coming face to face with this idea that there are aspects that I'm uncomfortable about how I am being, it's a process of growth that's difficult for anyone, let alone for kids at the end of the day who are spreading their wings. But then it starts begging the question of how as faculty, do we help? Can we help? Like, at what stage do you help in engaging in those
going back to
processes?
your early point, I mean, your person brings a different dynamic into it.
Right.
I mean, that is just true. And pretending that it isn't true doesn't help anybody, right? I mean, your engagement with students around that question is almost certainly different than mine. And it's an interesting thing to have to think about, because we don't like to think about our identity politics. You know, who wants to use identity politics? You don't
Right,
want
and
to.
I tried. I said, I'm just presenting the facts, right? This is what happened, but it's always through this filter for the students of, right, how they see me, or and my biases too, of course, right? So when I'm talking about slavery, and that's how we have certain dialects of Spanish in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and right. And then the students are looking at these African slaves and looking at me and right, saying, what's her agenda here? And I'm thinking, this is just a factual, right, presentation. Right. It's not. It doesn't have anything to do with my agenda. But no, it always comes through. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, the making the invisible visible, but also kind of naming the thing that they're often taught not to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
That's the challenge. I wonder, Robin, if you could talk about how you use students who have gone through your course, how you kind of tap into that as a type of student expertise, so to speak.
So this is I've used undergraduate course consultants for a couple of years now, and this is in a class I teach on language and discrimination. So very much about how language is engaged in processes of social conflict, and it actually came about. A colleague, Tim McKay in physics, was talking about using course consultants, but in a slightly different way than I ended up using them. And I thought, that is brilliant. I love that, because I realized, honestly, I'd gotten too old. Like there was a way in which I had reached an age where my understanding of what they find compelling is just not as sharp as it once was, because I'm further away from them than I once was age-wise. And so, I mean, maybe that's being too brutally honest methods, but that was actually the case. I realized that a lot of the materials that I found really interesting, they were not reacting in the same way that they used to. So it used to be that we shared interests, but it just that changes. And so, so I hired 2 students who had taken the course and were very engaged in the course, to find materials to explain to me what was interesting about them and why they thought they would be useful. But they were people who were sort of floated around the course. They would go to the discussion sections and help the GSIs understand dynamics that they thought might be going on. The GSIs could ask them, like, oh, this particular section seems never to want to talk, or whatever. And so they would sit there as students and then talk to the GSIs about what they thought was going on. They would talk to me about what was going on. They were actually the ones who convinced me to have to ban electronics, because they would sit in the back and they're like, those people are just shopping. That's all they do. And so I mean, those are just little pieces that they helped me get the perspective of a student in the class. So they come to the class, I pay them for their time to come to the class. They, find materials, but especially meet with me to talk about those materials and why they think they're interesting. And so it's a sort of a pedagogical moment for them as well.
Where does the funding come from?
We use greater funds. But I've also used my own research. I would use my own research funds, because it's not that much money, ultimately, and it's very valuable. They bring a really interesting perspective, and it's interesting for them to have this sort of expert place in the class, and to see the students. They would complain nonstop. Hey, I can't believe these students. Da, da, da. It's like, okay, wait, let's back up. Let's think about where your perspective is and what you're observing in a very different way than they are. So there's as much a pedagogical opportunity for them, and thinking about the way that Tim McKay had talked about it was, in research labs. Research labs are built of multi-generational teams of people. Mm-hmm. Why shouldn't pedagogical experiences be multi-generational too? And I just think that was brilliant. And so I stole it. And it's been nice. So I've done it a couple of times now, having students who took the class then come back as consultants for the class. They really do bring really interesting insights and materials that are useful, and they also can help explain. Sometimes I usually don't let them engage in the discussion set, the online discussions, but they do often have perspectives. Like I had a case where a student said that it was their sense that another student was being bigoted about something, and so I was able to ask the consultants, like, what would your take be on, how would you address this, what do you think would be the most useful for this. I would talk to them about, so in this class, about half the time I come out as lesbian and half the time I don't, and I often talk to them, like, what do you think, how is the dynamic of this class, is this something that I mean, it's not like I would ever hide it, but it's it's a different thing to be very formally out about it, because I'm like, Theresa, you wouldn't necessarily read it on my person. Although this was one of the things I was able to talk to them about. I was like, I actually think you can read it on my person. And they're like, oh, no, absolutely not. You just seem like kind of a frumpy, regular female professor. I was like, oh, okay. So, all right. So, I mean, that's, it's a way to have a kind of engagement with students that has different states. So it's very useful.
Have you gotten the temperature of students who are on the receiving end of those consultants? In other words, I imagine they don't have a lot of direct contact because it seems like they're behind the scenes working with you more.
Kind of. I mean, I think the students in the class, and I worry about this sometimes, see them as just other students in the class. It's a large class and there's 2 students sitting there. I always introduce them as these are people who are helping in the class, but I think most of the students in the class don't really have a sense of them as different from any other student. And again, I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but that is how it's been.
That probably makes the other students pretty honest in their behavior and their.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
so that's
and that's
a huge plus.
Certainly, the consultants feel that way.
That's really good.
So I think it's great. I think it's it really does engage the pedagogical circle in the process because it brings them in as experts in a certain way. Well, it's good.
Fantastic. And then Paul, we're interested in hearing about your projects.
Yeah. So we got 2 things going on. The first thing is it's a course for second-year student leaders, we call student assistants. They have been first-year students in the program. They're self-selected. They get a stipend to kind of be role models, to kind of show other students how to navigate the university. But they also lead clubs. They attend bi-weekly meetings, and they have to be enrolled in a common course. And this course has only gone through 2 iterations. Both of which were before my time here. And again, it's not me teaching this course, but it's our art director, Mark Tucker. And this course is rapidly evolving. It first began as, so the idea was that students would kind of grow by having a common experience, in which initially it was thought of as to help them develop leadership skills. And so around the arts in particular. So they went to a bunch of arts events and this kind of thing, and they put on an art event themselves. That developed quickly away from leadership sort of directly, like we're going to teach you how to be leaders, into how do we collaborate, how do we work together to develop skills that are, it's much more kind of intuitive. And so when I came on, I was invited to give my sort of perspective on this course, and I had a sort of strong feeling that it might be interesting to see what it might be like to pair our students with students from a different community, a different population. It's to sort of kind of build ties from our community into another community. What would that be like? How do we kind of share between? How can we kind of mutually benefit one another and learn from one another? And I think one of the benefits for our students potentially is that because our program, because these students can kind of bond so tightly, or because there kind of can be divisions among the students, what would it be like to have them still have that, whatever allegiances or friendships or bond they have, but give up some of that to another community? In other words, to kind of expand their empathy from each other outward to a different community. So how might they kind of grow from that experience? Also, and actually before I came here, I checked with Mark Tucker to make sure I wasn't speaking out of turn, to make sure this is actually this is the way he thinks of it too. And he said that's close enough. And so the other thing I think is valuable is to get them to think of themselves as partners, not as leaders, and that leadership comes from listening to other people. I think that's really all it is. Figuring out what a situation needs, how might everyone grow in this situation, how might you be a leader by giving something up, by stepping aside, by considering the needs of someone else. So that's another one of the things I hope they'll learn from this situation, so that they'll become more themselves. They'll access different resources within themselves by looking outward. And the other thing we've got going on is this is a great moment actually. This began from a staff meeting at LHSP, at Lloyd Hall Scholars Program, where we were looking for new ideas going ahead during my year as interim director, which I'll be continuing for another year. And two of our staff members said, why don't we have a race and ethnicity course centered in LHSP and benefit from the community we already have? Now, I think this is a bit of an experiment because it's such a close-knit community where people are taking classes and living together. Sometimes those classes can be kind of high stakes. If something is happening in a class, that's extending outside of the class. It's now in the halls, it's now in the rooms, it's right. Mm-hmm. So again, and this is we're pitching this for next winter, so we'll see. But the idea is how might we kind of capitalize on their desire to want to bond? Do you know? Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be an interesting teaching situation. Certainly high stakes for sharing. People don't want to be kind of outed in any kind of a way, when they don't even want to be up for workshop by themselves, when they have to kind of see each other outside in the halls. At the same time, I think I'm hoping there's a way to set it up that it's kind of emerges as a kind of a community enterprise. Look, we're all together here. We have this opportunity to think about these things in this environment. We have an opportunity to make these ideas in this community central. This is the way I'm going to be pitching it. And I originally didn't think I was going to be teaching this course. It was just a good idea that I wanted to move forward. And then I kept looking around for somebody to teach it, and then it became apparent that I'd be the one doing it. But now I'm excited. It feels. I mean, so the idea here is that I think a course like this is going to work best if it has a clear objective in terms of what we're looking at. So we're going to put writing and the arts at the center as the subject matter, because that's what they signed up for. So if we can get them talking about difficult ideas via the subject matter they signed up for, that's the idea. Yeah. So I'll let you know how it goes.
That sounds great. It sounds like you can incorporate some of the team building, right? If you have that community there.
Definitely. Yeah.
That sounds really fun.
It might be talking to you.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
So you've shared some moments that have been kind of difficult. I wonder if you would be willing to share some moments, a particular moment of success where you feel like you navigated well a situation, always knowing that you were all a very humble group. I know that, but I wonder if you would share something that you felt worked well, or something that, and it also can be in hindsight, like, oh, actually in hindsight I would probably do this differently.
I have a really good example of something that worked not so well, but
you can also share that.
I'm going to pause so that can be edited out. But so I mentioned at the beginning that I said I thought of inclusive teaching as going in, being aware that I don't know any of the students or what goes on in their minds until they tell me. And I came across this idea called the 1 minute paper. I don't know if anybody does this yet. And I started doing this in my class. And I'm going to modify the questions a little bit for the coming semester, but for 2 semesters now, I've done this at the end of every single class. So students get a 3x5 card or a scrap of paper, and they answer what is the muddiest point, what is the least clear point, what is the clearest point from class. Every single class. And I do various things with them at the start of the semester, and I need to find a way for it to take less time. I type them up and I share them with the class so they can see the range of things that their peers are getting out of the class and the range of things that they're confused about. And I'll see groupings, so I'll start to see, these main ideas are actually coming across, but a few people might be struggling with that, or I clearly didn't communicate certain ideas because most of the people in the class are. So it gives me a chance. So sometimes I'll type responses, sometimes I'll deliver responses in class, but it really was an eye-opener for me to realize that people really do absorb different things in different ways, and just then it just kind of gave me a window in to really see students as individual thinkers. I'd never understood. I thought the hardest thing about teaching, I thought, was a problem of audience, because you have so many different audiences in the room, and how do you pitch one class to a bunch of different audiences? And what I realized is actually you have to keep those audiences in mind, kind of like all the time, and you have to keep checking in with them all. So
it's really true. I could just think of so many, and I don't even know which is the worst. They're all. But this is a really interesting twist that a recent conflict I had. So this is a course that I do on pidgins and Creole languages, and how they come to be and how they emerge. And so I actually had a student whose family was Jamaican, and she was the only student of color in the class. And we bonded from the beginning, and everything was clicking. And she stopped doing the assignment. She stopped participating. And I always feel that you can't use, especially as underrepresented student, to represent the view of the whole of their group or anything. But as it turned out, she felt so at ease and just kind of comfortable that she just lacked respect. She thought that she would get a good grade just on being connected with me. And we had this whole conflict about, just because we're a lot of ways the same, you have to, So it's kind of the opposite of inclusivity. She felt so included in being a part of what I was teaching and being, having some shared experiences with me, that she just thought it was like a free pass. Right? And it was so interesting because, of course, I wanted to support the student. I understood some of her struggles, and especially being an underrepresented woman, in a place like University of Michigan. But we had some really hard conversations during my office hours, some really, I call them the wake-up messages, And kind of truthful discussions for her. And that was for me like, I'm used to fighting from the other way, But that was to me a different experience.
And she changed with the wake up messages?
Right. And I mean, she had a complicated life, and she did try to become what was more expected in terms of just kind of staying up to date with assignments and readings and things. But yeah, I think it was hard for her. And I think she did feel betrayed, though. She, and part of that's kind of a lack of maturity, a lack of, I think for the first time, as she said to me, I've never had a teacher that looked like me before. I never had someone, and I said, I get that, and I'm glad that I can be that person, but there's still these expectations, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
I feel compelled to say that when I was teaching, I had a similar situation. I worked a lot with the Latino group, and I was the only Latina on the faculty at a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. And so I had worked with them in other projects, and then when I offered a course on Central American and Mexican migration to the U.S. and immigration politics in the U.S., a lot of the students who I'd worked with came to take the course. They weren't offered often on that campus. And so when I gave critiques, it hurt them so deeply because they felt like,
right. It was personal.
you know, that it was personal, and so we had to work through that a lot, and so that there's that kind of extra level of responsibility that I felt to say to them, it would be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you these things so that you could improve, and I need to say it to you in the same way that I say it to all the students, and in the same delivery method, and then so, but it was an interesting phenomenon for me because I was surprised by the level, like the depth of their pain, you know, and especially one student in particular was very hurt by that. But it was, I think, in the end, a very incredible opportunity for him to learn, me to learn, and from both of us to grow from that. But yeah, I think that there's that added layer for faculty of color.
Yeah.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit. You've all mentioned that this is a process, that each time you teach a course, you're thinking about, as all good teachers do, you're thinking about, well, next time I'll try this, and next time I'll do that, and oh, if I had only done that, and oh, this is great because now I know to integrate this. The mark of excellent teachers. If you could, though, give advice to other faculty who are thinking about tackling and taking on the challenge of trying to be more inclusive and be more self-reflective in their inclusivity in the classroom, what advice would you offer?
Take the risk, I think.
Take
for
the risk.
I think it's something that it's easier to have a conversation in a faculty meeting than it is to bring it into your classroom. And I think it's not always clear when and how it fits in when and how different topics or methods or pedagogies fit with other parts of your class. And I think we're all, I won't say all, but many seem, there's the fear of what am I going to see when I click to see the evals at the end of the semester, and if it's not broken, why should I bother fixing it? Yet I think some of the most fulfilling interactions with students have come from engaging in topics that they're not used to having engaged with in their classroom, recognizing issues that students have, whether that be social identity, mental health, socioeconomic status, first-gen status, that are often acted as if it's not part of the classroom, and being caring and vulnerable yourself. And that's where, when I think back to what happened last semester, this semester before, those are the student interaction, those are the mentorship opportunities that have been amazing, right? That's why at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to going back and seeing what happens next. But it's not without risk. I'm nervous myself. There are some classes that I leave and it's automatically this, I just let this happen, or I didn't control this. And sometimes I think it's too easy to just be like, forget it. Like this isn't expected, right? For better or for worse. Like it's not expected. No one's going to check off in the box that I'm not doing this, right? But this is where I think having an impact, engaging with students, and often helping some of the students who are the least advantaged amongst our population feel like they do belong, they have a voice to add, it's important for them to be here, it's not symbolic, right? Like, I think that helps. So I would encourage people to just try it and then ask for advice, because the students can tell you right off the bat how you might be able to do it even better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my advice is that just remember it's always a work in progress. And that for me, for example, encouraging my students and having this whole process where we're open and having these interesting conversations and sometimes difficult ones challenged me as well. So I've brought in my knowledge about my discipline, right? After these 20 years, I think I know most of the tricks and games and the thoughts in my discipline. Some of the questions that the students pose to me, I find that I'm learning so much as well. So that inclusivity not only is benefiting us socially, but intellectually, right? And all around the students, myself, it's win-win. And so if you feel like you've been a veteran here teaching for a while, you're in a kind of a rut and you haven't tried to have some of these inclusive techniques, you might find that it also helps you as a scholar, right? It will be of benefit in that way too.
But I mean, frankly, that's our job. It's our job to be inclusive. That is. It's not really something you get to choose to think about or not think about. It's our job to think about it, and everyone's responsibility as a faculty member or anyone teaching in a classroom at this university. It's just frankly our job, and you need to do your job. I mean, that's I don't know. Maybe that's not as likely to achieve success in getting people to do it as some other things, but I just have increasingly less patience with people who say they're afraid to do this or that, because it's like, too bad, that's your job, buck it up and do your job.
I think it's interesting to think about how do you shift a reward structure to force that, right? I mean, and I went here as an engineer in undergrad, right? Like, and I can remember conversations where, oh no, this is just the science. Like, this doesn't come in, it's all a meritocracy, right. It's how you do the math equation, right. End of story. And it's like, well, no, it's not. So to some extent, I think there's an education of faculty that also needs to happen, not just of the, I mean, so I was taking it from the like fear lens, but there's also the recognition of where and how this comes in across all of the classes. It doesn't matter if it's math 115 or physics 140 or, one of the race and ethnicity requirements. This is integral to what should be going on in a classroom at the University of Michigan, but right now it's viewed as the extra in many spaces and not viewed as the foundation.
If I just say something about contingent faculty here, and faculty who, so I'm speaking about lecturers, in particular, some who are teaching semester to semester, and who feel a lot of pressure that every course they teach that's their livelihood, So, but thinking about that and still encouraging people to take that on, I would say one useful thing would be to kind of get support for that in people's departments, to kind of connect that up with what I'm thinking from an LSA perspective, from what the college is trying to do, from what the university is trying to do, from what the students want, to kind of build support among colleagues and with supervisors or chairs to kind of say this is important, to include that in your teaching philosophy, to kind of really kind of to locate that in such a way that if something goes awry, if something goes wrong in a class, then it's part of a rationale.
Sure.
Yeah. But also as well, for people who might be fearful of kind of stepping outside their comfort zone, this idea of instructors considering themselves as facilitators rather than as experts, and so that I think whatever our identities are or whatever our relationships are to difficult material, for me, I'm from a very working class background. I was first gen college student, and so often in the classroom, if I don't feel like the expert, if I don't feel like I'm the authority, I mean, I can just internally just kind of lose a bit of power here, and I lose my ground. So if a student asks me a question or a place or something happens in the classroom where I don't feel like I have control, that can, it can send me on a bit of an internal journey there for a minute. So thinking of myself as not being responsible for everything that people are saying in the classroom, but trying to direct it in productive ways, and remembering that I can kind of stay outside of it a little bit, I think is kind of it helps to build some kind of safety into that enterprise. The other thing is for people who might be cautious, is to realize how much you can predict based on the material that you're presenting. So that certain material comes with difficult conversations that you kind of can almost see where it's going to go. So that they do some work thinking about those things.
And also to include them. So, I mean, I'll back off a little bit.
No. I think you're right. I agree with you.
Absolutely not. You should not back off that.
And I mean, I do think it's important that whoever is leading or managing a unit absolutely not use any kind of stumbling when people are trying to use new practices as a reason for punishment or whatever. I mean, I think chairs have an important role there to play, to set a particular tone. It's chairs and deans who make it clear that this is your job, right? So, I mean, I think that's absolutely right about that. But I think what you get sometimes is people not including the material that will lead to those, like they know that those conversations are there. And there, I think you do have to probably help people see that yes, it could be scary to use this material that you might not know well, that is going to cause students to react in different ways. And to know that there's a lot of support actually here. I mean, the university has tons of support for inclusive teaching. It's not that the support isn't there. So making sure that people know where those resources are and are willing to take a little bit of time to study them, I think is probably part of it.
Well, and I've been amazed at how much the practice helped, right? Like, so I worked with a CRLT advisor. I talked to people at intergroup relations about the dialogue sessions, and I did a mini 10-minute, like, I'm going to pretend I'm actually teaching this because I don't know how I can comfortably navigate the conversation about this film clip, and I'm much safer doing it here than just trying it by fire in front of 50 students and not knowing what's going to happen, right? And I think sometimes those resources aren't recognized, or the various creative ways that you can use them for whatever best fits for your teaching comfort, right? So I like to practice and talk. I know other faculty who want written down in notes, and I would look like I couldn't sell that if that was the way I was teaching, and they'd feel very uncomfortable with the way I'm teaching. So when we think about the tools that department chairs or other also need, for them, like, that's a lot for them to know, to advise all of the different faculty on, and for faculty to know about how to ask, but continuing to push that conversation, recognizing what's there and not hesitating to call and ask, because if I don't know, someone usually within 2 or 3 phone calls does.
And I think the university is doing a better job overall. The newer incoming faculty do have lots of workshops and things that when I came in, you're kind of on your own, and you're, whatever worked for you was the way to do it. And I think now CRLT,
we had a 3-day program with CRLT about teaching in general, but also having elements of inclusivity, how to deal with difficult moments in the classroom, doing mock teaching. And so right now I think that's LS&A only, but LS&A does an amazing job with that. There are a number of programs in May that you can go to to work on different elements, whether it's the Diversity Institute or the Dialogue program, that help you step back when you're not in the middle of a semester and reflect on what's happening, and having people come into your classroom. So CRLT will come into your classroom and observe in a way that's off the record, but give you a sense of what's going on and translate what your students say to what you hear in a way that is really helpful. And so it is amazing to see how many resources U of M has to put. I mean, we were joking earlier about what are the rewards, but there is a lot of meat behind saying we care about inclusivity and we want this. The resources are there. As a university, I think we're hearing about it more and more. It's nothing I remember hearing as a student, which was a while ago, I will say.
And students may still not hear. Students themselves may not know.
Which is also I think sometimes difficult, because sometimes students who need it the most don't know, right?
I used to bring someone from the English Language Institute into this class to talk about all of the different things that students who were not who don't have degrees from English-speaking universities who come here as GSIs, like all the training they go through and all the different, and the students were absolutely shocked. They thought, they were like, I thought there was nothing, and and it's so that it is very interesting that students are not as aware, and of course, I mean, it's a different place in the whole system, but it would be interesting for students, I think, sometimes to know.
It does come back to, I mean, who knows what they read in the syllabus, but what we were talking about earlier with why some of the stuff is important to put in the syllabus, because, hopefully some students read it and they see, oh, wow, there is a focus on
fewer
this.
Actually.
I know. So how is it that you engage with some of that? But it signals something, I think. And what are other ways to signal that if the syllabus is becoming obsolete, what is the next thing to signal that would resonate?
The syllabus is becoming obsolete. Oh no, I'm learning so much here.
No, but as I think Theresa started off really well started off the whole conversation talking about empathy, and so letting students know that yes, international GSIs do a lot of training, that it's easier to critique when you don't understand all that goes into the preparing of that class. So we're going to take a moment. I want you to think for a second why this is important. If you can think of a quick explanation as to why all the effort, for each of you, think for a moment, and then I'll ask you to share those. What's the impact?
Well, Robin would say it's because it's our job, but a lot of people don't do their jobs, I found. So, but for me, it's because, in a way, beyond our job as teachers, I mean, as educators, right? For me, when I think about my moments of growth or when I've really expanded my knowledge, a lot of times it's been having difficult conversations or having to confront issues that I really didn't know a lot about, or I hadn't really looked into. And I think that that's the service we do to our students when we expose them to these ideas. That is the purpose of the university, right? That is our job. And that comes through including all of the multiple voices and experiences. And why it's important is because that's how you'll grow and that's how you'll expand your knowledge. And I think if we realize that, then maybe we don't have to do this.
I'm not really that hard. I also think it's just, otherwise we stand to lose so much, right? I mean, if we don't take this as important, there's so much human knowledge and human experience that we'll lose if people aren't able to bring it to the table. And I think that's not the world I want to live in. So for me, that's very important.
Taking it to that more, there are a lot of tough problems that we're trying to solve as a society. I mean, as a country, as a society, this is a space that, ideally students are coming here to learn so that they're better able to be members of that society. And it's in many ways less risky to think about this in a classroom than it is in a job or in, wherever you go next. And if we can get these voices in our classroom, but also get students comfortable with the skills and the process of engaging in some of these conversations, listening to different information, learning through that process, then hopefully we're establishing better future society members, problem solvers, leaders. I mean, there's a lot going on that hopefully will look better in the future and not worse, and maybe this can help play a role. I mean, in the real big pie in the sky. Why?
For me, it's about attempting to make a space for all students equally in the classroom. And that doesn't seem like a given. In an ideal way, it seems like a given, in terms of the Constitution. But in practice, it's the way it works out. It's not a given. So, what can I do as a teacher to help make that happen in practice? And then for me, I think a lot of these conversations and a lot of these difficult moments grow out of that, grow out of the range of perspectives, and making sure different voices are heard. But I think for me, it's just I feel, and this goes back to what Robin says. It's just my job. I feel really uncomfortable with the notion that a classroom is going to privilege certain kinds of voices, certain kinds of information, that a power dynamic is going to be set up in the classroom based on that. I think it's my job to kind of fulfill a promise to say, we want a variety of students here, and for that to be equitable, but then to deliver on what that means in the classroom.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to thank you all for your time. You've been so generous with your experiences and your ideas. And we will be talking more, I hope, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for what you guys are doing.
Thanks, yeah.